Reykjavik, Iceland, July 1972. Outside, the sun barely sets. This far north, in the middle of summer, darkness never fully arrives. The sky stays grey and heavy, like the atmosphere itself is holding its breath. Inside the Laugardalshire Sports Hall, two men sit across from each other at a wooden table. Between them, 32 pieces on 64 squares. Nothing else. The room is silent in a way that feels unnatural. Over 1,000 people watching, and nobody makes a sound. Because everybody in that room understands, even the ones who don't play chess, that what is happening here is not a game. This is the Cold War on a board. On one side, the reigning world champion, the product of decades of state-backed mastery. An entire system had been built to produce minds like his. Funding, elite coaches, psychologists, analysts. Full institutional support. He was the pinnacle of that machine. Calm, precise, nearly untouchable. He had never lost a world championship match. And he had no intention of starting now. On the other side, an American, alone, no team. No government backing, no psychologists. Just a man from Brooklyn who had spent his entire life studying one thing: how to dismantle anyone who sat across from him. He was already the most controversial figure the game had ever seen. Unpredictable, paranoid, almost impossible to control. He nearly didn't show up at all, arguing over money, complaining about the lighting, the cameras, even the sound in the room. He forfeited the first game over a dispute, almost walked away from the second. The entire match was on the edge of collapse before it had even begun. But now he was here, Game 6, and everything was on the line. Understand what this moment meant. He was behind, and the pressure wasn't just competitive. It was something deeper. He had become a symbol. To many, he represented more than just himself, more than just the game. He was the idea that one man, alone, could walk into a system built over decades and break it, or fail, and prove that the system was unbeatable. The American stares at the board. The position in front of him, by every conventional measure, is not one he should have chosen. He's taken a strategic risk most grandmasters would avoid, the kind of move textbooks would call questionable, the kind that creates weaknesses. A player of the world champion's caliber should be able to punish. Everyone sees it. Every analyst in the room knows. Every member of the world champion's team knows. The world champion almost certainly knows, and yet, the American plays it anyway, not because it's the strongest move on the board, but because it's the move that plants doubt. The kind of doubt that lingers, that spreads, that makes every decision feel uncertain. From this moment on, every move the world champion makes won't just be calculation. It will be hesitation. The clock ticks. The world champion studies the position. And for a brief moment, something shifts behind his eyes. Most people think they understand losing. They don't. When you lose a job, you find another one. When you lose an argument, you walk away. When you lose money, time can return it. Losing, for most people, is uncomfortable, temporary, recoverable. A losing position in chess is something different entirely. And here is the first thing you need to understand. A losing position is not checkmate. Checkmate is the end. It's over. There's nothing to think about anymore. A losing position is something far more psychologically brutal than that. A losing position is the moment. You can still see the whole board. You can still move. The game is still being played. But every path forward, every single line you calculate, every sequence of moves you run in your mind, ends worse than the one before it. The walls aren't closing on your body. They're closing on your options. And a grandmother can see it happening in real time. Imagine standing in a corridor that is slowly narrowing. You can still walk. There is still space around you. But you can see, 10 steps ahead, 20 steps ahead, that the corridor ends. and you cannot find a way out. That is a losing position. The game isn't over. But the math is beginning to say it should be. Now add this. You have spent decades training your mind to calculate faster and deeper than almost any human being alive. You can see 12, 15, sometimes 20 moves ahead. Pattern recognition so refined it operates almost below conscious thought. You have studied thousands of games. You have memorized openings, endgames, tactical sequences. Your mind is one of the most finely tuned calculation instruments on Earth. And right now, every single thing that instrument is telling you is bad news. That is the specific psychological horror of a losing position at grandmother level. It is not ignorance. You cannot tell yourself you miss something, that you don't fully understand the position. That maybe it's not as bad as it looks. You understand it completely. You see it with total clarity. And what you see is a position that is turning against you, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the cold, grinding certainty of mathematics. Most players at this moment make the same mistake. They panic inward. The mind that was trained to calculate starts calculating its own defeat, running the lines that confirm the position is lost, counting the moves until the inevitable. The brain, under existential threat, does something deeply human and deeply dangerous. It starts preparing for the outcome it fears most, not to prevent it, to survive it emotionally. And the moment that happens, the moment the mind shifts from fighting the position to managing the loss, the game is over. Not because the board says so, because the player decided it. This is where grandmasters are different, not in talent, not in calculation speed, not in how many openings they've memorized, in what they do in the moment the position turns. Because a grandmother in a losing position does not ask, "How do I escape this?" They ask something far more dangerous. What does my opponent need to be true for them to win? And how do I make them doubt it? That single shift from defending a position to attacking an assumption is the difference between a player who loses gracefully and a player who turns a lost game into a legend. The challenger knew this better than anyone who ever sat at a board. And in Game 6, with the clock ticking and the position turning against him, that is exactly the question he was asking. To understand what the challenger was doing at that board, you first need to understand what he was sitting across from. Not a man, a machine. In 1945, the Soviet Union made a decision that had nothing to do with chess and everything to do with power. Stalin's government looked at the international chess stage and saw something most governments would have dismissed as trivial, a game played on a board with carved pieces, and recognized it for what it actually was, a global theater of intelligence, a public demonstration broadcast to the entire world of which system produced superior minds, capitalism or communism, the West or the East, which ideology created human beings capable of thinking deeper, calculating further, outmaneuvering the other under pressure. Stalin decided the answer would always be the Soviet Union, and he built a machine to make sure of it. The USSR created a state-sponsored chess program unlike anything the world had ever seen. Chess was embedded into the school curriculum across the entire country. The most gifted children were identified early, not by wealth, not by family connections, but purely by ability, and funneled into dedicated training academies. Coaches were paid by the state. Analysts were employed full-time. Psychologists were brought in, not to help players cope with pressure, but to study the psychology of opponents, to find the fractures, the patterns of doubt, the moments when a specific player's mind became vulnerable. The Soviet Union did not produce chess champions. It manufactured them. By the time the challenger arrived in Reykjavik in 1972, the USSR had held the World Chess Championship for 24 of the previous 27 years. 24 years, one country, one system, dominating the highest level of human strategic thought for nearly 3 decades without interruption. The world champion was their current product, and he was extraordinary. The world champion had been identified as exceptional at the age of 5. By 10, he was being formally trained. By 18, he was already one of the most dangerous players in the world. By the time he became world champion, he had spent his entire life inside the Soviet chess apparatus, coached, analyzed, psychologically prepared, strategically sharpened by an army of minds dedicated entirely to making him unbeatable. For this match, the match against the challenger, the Soviets sent a delegation, not just the world champion, a team, grandmother seconds, who analyzed every game the challenger had ever played publicly. Psychologists who had built behavioral profiles on his going back years, cataloging his emotional triggers, his patterns under pressure, his responses to discomfort and disruption. Analysts running preparation on every opening he was likely to play, every variation, every deviation. The Soviet team arrived in Reykjavik with filing cabinets of research, with contingency plans for contingency plans, with a level of preparation that treated this chess match the way a military operation treats a campaign. They had studied the him the way you study an enemy, and the challenger. He came with a suitcase, no seconds, no psychologists, no team of analysts, no government backing, no filing cabinets of research. Just him, his preparation, and the mind that operated by rules nobody else fully understood. This was the reality of what was sitting across from in Game 6, not just the world. The accumulated weight of 30 years of Soviet investment in human intelligence, sitting across a wooden table, staring at the same board. And here is what made his situation even more precarious. The Soviets had not waited for the match to begin their campaign against him. The psychological operation started long before Game 1. The delays he had caused, the demands about cameras, the lighting complaints, the forfeit of Game 1. The Soviet delegation had watched all of it and catalogued every reaction, every outburst, every demand, every moment of erratic behavior. They built a picture of a man who was brilliant but volatile, genius but unstable. A player who could be rattled, who had, in fact, been rattling himself before the match even started. When he sat down for Game 6, the Soviets believed they understood him completely. They had studied everything he had ever shown the world. What they had not studied, what nobody had studied, because nobody had ever seen it, was what he did when his back was against the wall and every rational calculation said the position was lost. Because he had never lost a position that way before. Not because he always found the best move. Because he never played the move they were prepared for. Let's go inside the skull. Not the challenger's skull specifically, any grandmaster's skull. Any elite decision maker sitting inside a moment where the math is turning against them and the clock is running and everything they have spent their life building is sitting on the outcome of what they do in the next 60 seconds. Because neuroscience has spent decades studying exactly this moment. And what it has found is not what most people expect. The first thing that happens when a grandmother recognizes a losing position is not panic. Panic comes later, and only in the players who lose. The first thing that happens is something far more precise, a neurological shift that researchers who study expert decision-making under pressure have documented consistently across chess players, military commanders, emergency surgeons, and crisis negotiators. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term calculation, rational planning, weighing consequences, begins to yield, not shut down. Not collapse, yield, step back, make room. And the older, faster, deeper part of the brain, the part built not for chess, but for survival, begins to move forward. This is not weakness. This is not the brain failing. This is the brain doing something extraordinarily sophisticated that took millions of years to develop, recognizing that the situation has changed, that the tools that work in stable conditions are not the tools that work when the walls are closing, and shifting resources accordingly. In stable conditions, in the opening of a game, in a balanced position, when time is available, the grandmaster's prefrontal cortex is dominant. Calculation is deliberate, sequential, exhaustive. He runs lines, he evaluates, he compares, he decides. The process is slow by the standards of the situation, but deep, reaching 15, 20 moves into the future with mathematical precision, but in a losing position, under time pressure, with everything on the line, that process becomes a liability. Here is why. When you calculate in a losing position, you are running lines that confirm the position is lost. Every sequence you trace with your prefrontal cortex, every careful, rational, exhaustive calculation, ends in the same place. Worse, worse, worse. The very tool that makes a grandmother great in a balanced game becomes, in a losing position, a machine that generates evidence of its own defeat. Researchers studying chess players under pressure found something remarkable. Players who continued to rely on deep sequential calculation in losing positions performed worse than players who shifted, consciously or unconsciously, to a more instinctive, pattern-based mode of decision-making. Not because instinct is superior to calculation, but because in a losing position, calculation confirms the loss, while instinct asks a different question entirely. Instinct doesn't ask, "What is the best move?" Instinct asks, "What is the most dangerous move?" These are not the same question. The best move in a losing position is often a move that slows the loss, defends, delays, plays for a draw. It is the rational move, the calculated move, the move that a computer would identify as objectively correct given the position. The most dangerous move is something else entirely. The most dangerous move is the move that changes the nature of the position so fundamentally that the opponent's preparation, all of it, every line they calculated, every variation they studied, becomes partially or completely irrelevant. It is not necessarily the best move on the board. It may not even be a good move by objective standards, but it is a move that creates complexity, and complexity, in a losing position, is oxygen. Here is what complexity does to the opponent's brain. When a position is stable, when the game is proceeding along expected lines, the opponent's prefrontal cortex is also dominant. He's calculating, evaluating, comparing, running the same sequential process. And in a winning position, that process is pleasurable. Every line he traces confirms his advantage. He is, neurologically, experiencing something close to confidence, a biochemical state in which certainty compounds itself. The more lines he runs that confirm his winning position, the more certain he becomes, and the more that certainty narrows his attention to the lines he has already identified as winning. This is the opponent's vulnerability. Certainty, at the grandmother level, is not strength. It is a filter, and a filter, by definition, excludes. When a winning player becomes certain, he stops looking for what he hasn't seen. Why would he? Every line he's calculated confirms he's winning. The position is under control. The outcome is approaching. His brain, awash in the neurochemistry of anticipated victory, begins as subtly, invisibly, without his awareness to narrow its search, to stop entertaining the possibility that something he hasn't considered is lurking in the position, and then the losing player makes a move that shouldn't be there. A move that doesn't fit the pattern, that doesn't follow the expected lines, that introduces a complication the winning player hasn't calculated, not because it's a brilliant move, but because it's an unexpected one. And the winning player's brain, it does something involuntary and devastating. It resets all that calculation, all those lines confirming the win, all that accumulated certainty has to be partially discarded, because there is now a new variable in the position that wasn't there before, and the prefrontal cortex, suddenly uncertain, has to start again, recalculate, reorient, find the new winning line through the new complexity. This takes time. It takes energy. It takes something rarer and more precious than either. It takes the opponent's certainty, and it replaces it with doubt. And doubt, at the grandmother level, is a weapon more powerful than any piece on the board. The challenger understood this not as a theory, not as a framework he had read about or been taught. He understood it the way a surgeon understands anatomy, from the inside, from thousands of hours of practice, from sitting across from the best players in the world and learning exactly where their certainty lived and exactly how to touch it. In Game 6, with the position turning against him and the clock ticking and the entire Soviet apparatus sitting on the other side of the board, the challenger did not look for the best move. He looked for the move that would make the world champion's certainty collapse. And he found it. Go back to the board. Game 6, Reykjavik, 1972. The match score at this point is not in challenger's favor. He had forfeited Game 1 without sitting down. He had clawed back Game 2 in a way that shocked the chess world. But the overall trajectory of the match, the momentum, the psychological weight of it was sitting on Spassky's side of the table. The Soviet machine was functioning exactly as designed. Spassky was calm, prepared, in control. And then Fischer did something that nobody in that room, nobody watching, nobody analyzing, nobody on the Soviet preparation team with their filing cabinets and their psychological profiles had prepared for. He played the wrong opening. Not wrong by accident, wrong by design. Let me explain what this means, because it matters. In chess at the grandmaster level, the opening, the first sequence of moves in a game, is not improvised. It is prepared. Both players arrive at the board, having studied thousands of possible opening variations, having memorized lines that extend sometimes 20 or 30 moves deep into the game before a genuinely new decision is to be made. The opening is the part of the game where preparation is king, where the hours you put in away from the board show up at the board. The challenger's entire career had been built on one opening system as black, the Sicilian defense. It was his signature, his weapon, the opening he had used to dismantle player after player on his way to this match. The Soviet preparation team knew this. They had spent months analyzing every Sicilian game the challenger had ever played, preparing the world champion's responses, finding the variations that would give him the best chance of neutralizing the challenger's most dangerous weapon. They were ready for the Sicilian. They were not ready for what the challenger played instead. On move 1, the challenger moved his king's bishop pawn forward 2 squares, a move so unexpected, so contrary to everything the challenger had ever shown in his professional career, that the grandmaster commentators, watching the game live, fell into momentary confusion. Some assumed they had misread the position. Others assumed the challenger was making a psychological statement, a provocation, not a serious opening choice. But the challenger was entirely serious. What he had played was the King's Gambit, an opening so old it was considered almost antique, fashionable in the Romantic era of chess in the 1800s, largely abandoned at the elite level by the 20th century because it was considered too risky, too speculative, too committal. You were offering a pawn, sacrificing material, in exchange for rapid development and attacking chances. In the era of computer-precise preparation and defensive mastery, the King's Gambit at World Championship level was, by consensus, unsound. The challenger had written about this himself. Years earlier, he had published an article about the King's Gambit in which he had essentially argued that with correct play, black could refute it, could prove it objectively inferior. He had spent pages demonstrating its weaknesses. And now he was playing it against the world champion. In the most important game of the most important match of his life, the Soviet seconds in the analysis room who received the move and, for a moment, did not know what to do with it. Their preparation, the months of work, the filing cabinets, the psychological profiles, the carefully calculated responses to the Sicilian was sitting on the table, suddenly and completely irrelevant. The challenger had not just played an unexpected move. He had made an entire category of their preparation disappear. The world champion looked at the board. He had a decision to make, and he had to make it largely on his own. Because the line the challenger had played, the specific variation within the King's Gambit, was not something the world champion had deeply prepared. Why would he have? The challenger himself had written that it was theoretically dubious. Nobody at the world championship level had played it in decades, but here it was, on the board, in Game 6, being played by the challenger. And the world champion, for the first time in the match, was not playing against the challenger's preparation. He was playing against the challenger's mind. Now understand what this does to a grandmother at the elite level. When you are playing within your preparation, within the lines, you have studied and memorized and analyzed. There is a specific kind of cognitive confidence that operates almost below consciousness. You are not calculating from scratch. You are recognizing the position is familiar. The responses are known. Your mind is moving along grooves. It has carved through thousands of hours of work. And that movement is fast, efficient, almost automatic. When the position leaves your preparation, when you step off the known path and into unmapped territory, that automatic movement stops. Everything slows down. You are calculating from first principles now. Building the position from scratch with your own understanding, your own calculation, your own judgment, without the safety net of prior analysis. And you are doing this against a man who, at this precise moment, is playing in exactly the territory he chose, who prepared this exact position, who is at home here in a way you are not. The clock keeps ticking. The world champion played on. He is a world champion. He does not collapse at the sight of an unexpected opening. He found responses. He navigated the position. He was not immediately lost. But something had changed. The certainty was gone. Every move the world champion made from that point forward was made with a fraction less confidence than the move before it. Not panic, not collapse. Something more insidious than either. A subtle, growing awareness that the ground beneath the position was not as solid as it had been. That challenger was not playing the game the world champion had prepared for. That somewhere in this position, in this unexpected territory that challenger had deliberately chosen, there might be something the world champion hadn't seen. That suspicion, that possibility of an unseen threat is more debilitating than a visible one. A visible threat you respond to. You calculate the lines. You find the defense. You neutralize it. Your certainty is tested and survives. An unseen threat you cannot respond to. Because you don't know where it is. You don't know if it exists. You only know that the man across from you chose this position deliberately. That he sacrificed a pawn to get here. That he published an article years ago saying this opening was dubious, and then played it anyway, against you, in Game 6 of the World Championship. And you do not know why. The game lasted 41 moves, the challenger won. Not with a brilliant tactical combination, not with a stunning sacrifice, with something quieter and more complete than either. He won by sustaining, for 41 moves, the psychological state he had engineered with his first unexpected choice, keeping the world champion slightly off balance, slightly uncertain, slightly unable to find the solid ground his preparation had promised him. When the game ended, the world champion did something that almost never happens at the grandmother level. He stood up and applauded. The world champion, product of the Soviet machine, backed by 30 years of state investment in human intelligence, stood up from the board and applauded the man who had just beaten him, not out of defeat, out of recognition. He had just watched someone do something to him that he could not fully explain, could not fully decode, even in retrospect. The challenger, now world champion, had played an opening he knew was theoretically dubious, had sacrificed a pawn he didn't need to sacrifice, had entered territory that every analyst in the room would have called unnecessary risk, and had won anyway, not because the move was right, because it made him wrong.